My name is Priya, and I'm the marketing lead here at VTEX. Thanks to everyone for joining us on today's webinar on HDMI 2.1. So today's presentation will be about 20 minutes, followed by a Q&A session. If you have any questions, feel free to type them in the Q&A box or in the chat box. We'll be sending a link to the recording in a day or two by email. Now, let me introduce you to today's speakers. We have Craig Polk, who's a product development manager here at VTEX. Before joining VTEX, Craig was at Bell Labs and Nokia, where he worked on evolving communication networks through testing, customer support, and product development. Past work centered on innovation across several industry sectors: healthcare, education, and environmental science. A graduate of Stevens Institute of Technology and Purdue University, Craig is passionate about developing products that save lives, bring joy, and inspire the future. We're also joined by Richard Whitty, sales manager. Rich graduated from West Point in 1987. After serving in the Army, Rich started on a career selling capital equipment to the semiconductor industry. Rich has many years of engineering and sales experience, and he joined VTEX last year. Right, now over to Craig and Rich.
Thanks, Priya.
So I don't see the screen. I don't know, Craig, if you're able to share.
I'm just sharing it right now. It'll just be up in a moment.
And
okay.
Thanks for everyone for joining us. Craig's going to be the main presenter, but is it time to upgrade to HDMI 2.1? Is it worth it? Craig Polk and Rich Whitty. So I guess my first question, I can read. Hey, my first question, Craig, is what exactly is HDMI 2.1?
Well, yeah, Rich, that's a question that a lot of people are asking right now. So basically, just to kind of set the stage, what we're going to talk about today, we just want to know a little bit about HDMI and the standard that it came from. So we're currently in a category 3, which is known as the ultra high definition. And so these standards come from us from the HDMI organization. And the important thing to notice about what is 2.1, we really want to talk about the bandwidth and the rate that it supports when you look at it versus the past 2.0 standard. So we're moving from 18 gig up to 48 gig. And that's going to allow us to do some end-to-end support of much higher resolutions, such as 8K and 4K also, with different refresh rates. And there are some allowances for 5K and 10K as well. But a lot of the things that makes this version of the standard different is the features that it brings in. So there's some features around eARC, which is related to audio. And then there's multiple features that improve the latency, things that happen with the video for tearing or color resolution, and also refreshing. And so those are very important and different from 2.0, where we find ourselves now. And
so these HDMI 2.1 features, they look very beneficial, especially for gaming people. I think the last time I was gaming was Doom back in 1991, and prior to that, we had one of those Pong features. I think we were the first ones in our neighborhood to get it. But could you also tell us about other maybe commercial or industrial applications?
Yeah, we'll definitely get into that. But I also remember Doom carrying around like 15, 20 floppy disks to install it on my PC back in back when I was also playing games. But one of the other features I wanted to mention also is this cable power feature that's coming out, and we'll talk a little bit later on why that's important to our customers. But you know, before we get into the industries, we kind of want to just make sure we understand where we're coming from, the resolution, and how we moved from an HD to Ultra HD 4K and then into 8K. We're really doubling the amount of pixels that we're able to support. And this really has impact on the size of the screen that we're able to show along with our refresh rates. So if you think about it from a normal 1080p, we had a specific resolution we were able to support. And then when 2.0 came out and we were able to go into 4K, we're doubling the size. And now we're moving into 2.1. We have now support for 5K, 8K, and 10K. So you could just see in this kind of comparison the options that we have for different size and amount of screens that can be in the screen. Size is really magnified over the last several years, and specifically when we're coming out with this version. So to your question about the different industries, yeah, it's really important in gaming, and some of those features we talked about are really looking to span into media and entertainment. And then so for the sake of this webinar, I'm kind of putting gaming in the media and entertainment space. I know you can really discuss it on its own, but just to keep it kind of simple, I really just wanted to focus on kind of industries in a little broader term. So we see film and video industry, also home TV, as well as theater TV. Theater experiences moving to these higher resolution and refresh rates. Also in broadcasting, when you have the need for multiple information through many screens. And an interesting thing that's happened pretty recently, I want to say over the last couple years, has been the emergence of esports and the popularity that has grown into. And I believe now actually in United States universities, there's more than 200 universities that have esports as recognized sporting activities as part of their school. And some of the features we talked about, especially the refresh rate features and the enhancement in color, really give a competitive edge to people that are able to use like a 4K at 120 hertz compared to those that are not. And another industry that this is starting to develop in is really in education and training. We're starting to see simulators as well as virtual reality headsets and augmented reality getting into higher resolution displays. And this is to enhance the amount of learning and access through the image and the programs that are really coming through to help the students in that. Another interesting application is in the medical field. And this is kind of really just trying to play catch up in a way. That's kind of like how I see it, since there are all these devices that have the capability of capturing these images at a very high resolution. But when you compare that to how the sources and the displays are able to show all of this imaging, it's kind of a little behind. So as HDMI 2.1 is going to continue to expand in the marketplace, we're going to be able to see these images used much more in medical diagnostic cases. So
I was going to say we have one of our customers is a medical imaging equipment manufacturer for pulmonary. So kind of interests me, the set of lungs that you have up there. I like the picture.
Yeah, well, I'm actually going to talk about a use case for something that happened pretty interesting in imaging technology. But before we do that, I just wanted to go through this kind of case for media and entertainment. So what we're looking at, this is the MGM Theater in Macau, and this is the world's largest indoor multi-wall screen display. Just to kind of think of this, well, how is HDMI 2.1 can help something like this? So if you're familiar with some of these wall displays, they require multiple video sources to be able to get you to the overall resolution that you would want. So just kind of looking at it from a comparison perspective, if we're transmitting video at 1080p, we most likely would have connections in the count of around by 16, right, to be able to support a very large resolution. So you're going to have like groups of like 16 sources connecting to all of these displays. And as HDMI 2.0 came out, we were able to send a 4K image. So that brought it down to only a need for groups of 4. So as we move to 2.1 and we're able to support an 8K resolution now with the higher bandwidth, that's going to further reduce it down to a single connection when we just kind of look at this from a ratio perspective. So in HDMI 2.1, related to these wall mount displays in either mid or large size, you're looking at either a reduction of 16 cables or 14 cables, if you kind of look at it from a ratio. So that's a pretty large amount of components and cables that you won't have to worry about connecting and maintaining. And to your question about medical. So during the pandemic, there's been some new imaging technology that's kind of really developed. One of them is the HIP CT scan. So this is a new scan that allows 3D rendering and then zooming in kind of in almost real time so that we can get down to a very cellular view. So there's a large amount of resolution and color differences that's needed. So features like dynamic HDR really play an important part in here. And so if we're kind of, as we go through this, you can see that this imaging is able to take a 3D rendering, and then it's able to zoom in on a cellular level. And this really helps doctors who are doing diagnostics, and it's kind of lining up and catching up with some of the AI diagnostics that's being done on equipment that could do this imaging. And what we're actually seeing here is a video. I'll put a link up in the top, where there was some research done during COVID to map a healthy lung versus one that's gone through having COVID. And so they did several image captures and studies in that. So it was pretty interesting.
So these are all x-rays. That's pretty neat.
Yeah. So there's this new, not being as much a doctor studying medical field, there's this new hierarchical phase CT scan technology that's kind of been developed over the last couple of years, and it's really starting to come out. And so it's really driving to get down to that kind of cellular view level where you can see a single cell, that you would need some type of resolution to be able to keep up and see what these look like, right?
So moving on, what are some other notes of consideration, let's say hardware-wise or component-wise, for this application?
Yeah, so when, excuse me, so when we talk about our systems, there's 3 primary areas that we're focused on. So of course, there's the video source, what that has, and then the other side of the equation is what's in the display. But we have to remember not to forget about our connection inside, putting these 2 together. So traditionally, what you'll see in homes and in short connections, there's a passive copper cable. But a note and a note for consideration is as we move to 2.1, there is now a new ultra high definition cable that's required to be able to support this 48 gig rate. So it's important that the cable is one that supports the higher bandwidth. So as we continue to look at some of the different connection types, we have options for hybrid cables as well. So that's just a mix of fiber and cable. We also have pure fiber connections. And in one of my earlier slides, I mentioned about how we would getting back to the power component to the standard. Currently, right now, you need external power for all of the electrical to optical conversion. And this is primarily done through external DC power that comes from an extra AC plug, specifically on the display side, it's really needed. So what this feature is looking to do is to kind of get away with that external power, and it would provide power for active fiber connections and not need external. And then last, you can connect this up to a video over network, a video over optical network, or Ethernet network, and be able to then send this throughout a whole building or a complex.
Sure. So, Craig, it's interesting taking a look at the different cable compositions. I have some, I believe, Belkin HDMI cables for home use. Interestingly enough, I'm just curious that in the other things that VTEX does, we take a look at a lot of datacom over copper versus datacom over optical. And I noticed that when the bandwidth needs go up, that the distance that you can transmit media over copper certainly diminishes or shortens. Is that the same for video over fiber as well? Is there a max, distance that you can transmit HDMI 2.1 at 48 gigs or less over copper?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's a good point to bring up. So, and it operates the same way, right? So our frequency is increasing. And so as we're supporting these higher bandwidths, the distance that the cable can cover is actually going to shrink. So for a passive cable, we really wouldn't expect anything more than 15 feet or 5 meters. Our recommendation would come out to not really use anything more than 10 feet, kind of in passive connections that you would use in your home. And then we would kind of really move to more of an active or hybrid situation where those could go to 25 feet, around 25 feet, maybe a little more. And then as we move into a pure fiber connection, then you're looking at maybe a 1,000 feet, 30 meters or more. But then just to keep in mind with that, the consideration for most of the current supported 2.0 and 2.1 connections, you still need some external power for those as well.
Okay, so just what was the length again on a pure fiber? That was 1,000 feet, 300 meters.
Yeah, we would definitely get 1,000 feet out of a pure fiber connection.
Okay, thanks. Okay, can you talk a little bit about the standard changes and anything of interest that we've seen since 2.1 has come about?
Yeah, sure. So one of the important things to note is that there's a lot of confusion going on with what 2.1 really means, and so just so everyone knows, and a lot of the other suppliers and companies are starting to do this as well. You really have to be kind of careful of what says 2.1 because it doesn't always mean that it's 2.1. So really why this happened is because from a standards perspective, 2.0 doesn't really exist anymore. So they've just kind of taken those features and kind of lumped them into the 2.1 as a subset. And they're really looking at all of the 2.1 features as new capabilities, which are really optional, right? Things like, the FRL, the VRR, the dynamic HDR. These are all just kind of like optional things. So you need to be aware of what's in there.
So what is, for my benefit and anyone else who might not be familiar, what does the acronym FRL stand for?
Oh, yeah, sure. So FRL, this is a fixed rate link. So it's a signaling technology that kind of replaced the past transition minimize differential signal, TDMS, that was used in prior HDMI standards. And it allows for these higher resolutions. So, without this different signaling, you can't get to the 4K at the higher refresh rates, and the 8, 5, and 10K as well.
Thank you.
So one of the things that the standards is trying to do is they're really requesting, or I guess you could say requiring, that all devices put in what features they really support, because they don't want any confusion on this. They don't want you just to say we support 2.1, we're compliant with 2.1, without putting some additional information in there. So what that really means is you really have to look at the features, you have to look at the specs and see what features are in there, right? If it's including any of the HDR features or any of the new color enhancements. So you really need to watch what's in there. What we're seeing is some suppliers and some device manufacturers are really taking their HDMI 2.0 and they're just kind of rebranding it as 2.1, and they really don't even support the fixed rate link either, and they're still using the old signaling. So that's important to look to see what they're doing. And just to make this a little less confusing, there's a new 2.1a that just came out in February. And the standard usually says that the alphabetical version shouldn't really be included in anything that's like listed or marketing. So I'm expecting to see some people that are compliant with the 2.1a features, but they may be listing this as 2.1. So I'm interested to see how that's going to play out. It's kind of similar with there was some confusion around HDMI 2.0 and 2.0b. So just to make sure there's less confusion, we'll throw something else like that in there to watch out for.
It's interesting. I've actually read a lot of warnings on, not being HDMI 2.1, not really being compliant, and as you said, just branding themselves as 2.1 compliant. The warnings that I've seen on the internet typically deal with either a source or a monitor. Does that also carry over to the cabling aspects of the hardware as well?
That's a really good question. Yeah, for our connections, specifically like cabling, the feature set isn't really that's not really important, because it's between the source and the display, how they do their handshaking and what they can actually support. The cable and all of the, either if it's passive, active, or pure fiber, really needs to support the higher rate that's capable. So you definitely want to know the rate and the bandwidth that's supported. That's really the key thing for the connection. And one of the things to note, because we've been talking about hardware and how the hardware needs to be capable for the 2.1, there's also several companies that are talking about adding software upgrades to bring features that currently aren't on their hardware in at a later time. So we're going to see some companies doing that, where they list current features, or they may list features based on what the software version is. So that's another kind of little caveat to watch out for, is that when you actually purchase something and it comes with a certain software from the store and you have it set up in you know, your environment, either your company or in hospital or entertainment area, it may not work as advertised, and you're just gonna have to check to see if there's newer software that came out for that will add those features in there.
Thanks, Craig. That's very informative. Pri, I was wondering if you could help out since I don't have a view. Do we have any questions?
Craig, can you comment on the future of the HDMI 2.1? Sir, 2.1, yeah, standard or?
Yeah, sure. I can definitely do that. I know if you also have other questions, our contact information is on there. One of the things that I'm kind of looking at is where is the resolution going to go? And what are some of these AV applications for 5K and 10K? And we're starting to see more development in like ultra wide curved screens that are starting to come out, and for applications that are more like immersive. And it would be interesting to see when 10K is going to happen like that. I know initially it was kind of projected sometime between 2025 and 2030 where we would start seeing more of these come out, because right now the displays that are out are like very expensive and they're not really economical at all. So maybe in the next couple of years we'll see some changes in that.
That's pretty cool, Craig. Thanks. My you know, we talk about, you know, things being cost prohibitive, especially for the, what you might say, the early adopters in terms of, you know, new technologies or new standards. But interestingly enough, you just mentioned something that I found interesting. My parents bought these for their home use, you know, for just commercial use, not for commercial, but just for end user. They purchased the Samsung curved, you know, concave TVs, and they're really, really nice, have a lot of color contrast, and really make you feel like you're part of the picture. But I just, I'm going off on a segue or a tangent. So I'll throw it back to Craig or anyone else who has any questions.
I think I see there's another Q&A question. So this talks about if there's any oversight that's being done. So I guess officially, you know, the standards body doesn't really do kind of oversight and checking what's actually there. So they have put out for their compliance, you're supposed to include all of this in the product information of what features it supports. So you know, companies like us that are in this space, like VTech that's in this space, and then also manufacturers for sources and monitors, they're trying to do their best to make sure the customers are educated in what to look for. You know, if there's any questions, you know, we're happy to work with you, you know, to help you through your solution. But it's really kind of a word of warning to make sure that you read through the fine print almost, and just to kind of be aware as this continues to develop and moves into, you know, from 2.1 to 2.1 A, to make sure what you're actually looking for are the features that are really included.
Thank you, Craig. Well, thanks everybody. It's been very nice to have you all with us. If you have any questions, please feel free to respond back. I think Priya may be sending you out some notes and also a link to this webinar, but please feel free to reach out to VTech. We're a company out of New Jersey providing video over fiber products, and we can be reached at 201-296-0145. And thanks once again, and have a wonderful day.